before talking about e-apostees, let me clarify some of the terminology. And I don't know if you can see these slides on that. Yes, okay, it's all working well. So there is the conference and there is the convention. And these are not the same things. When we talk about the conference, we refer to the Hague Conference on Private International Law. This is the official name of the intergovernmental organization that we represent with Brody here today. The French name is the Conférence de l'aide aux droits nationaux privés, and if you take these four letters, you get the acronym HCCH, which therefore stands for Hague Conference, Conférence de l'aide. That is the first mystery solved. It's also easy to remember because it's the URL of our website, hcch.net. What is the HCCH? It's an intergovernmental organization, the mandate of which is the unification of private international law rules. And certainly not going to go into any details in explaining what private international law is, but think basically of any cross-border international relation between people or commercial operators. Any interpersonal cross-border relationship, cross-border marriage, a cross-border divorce, can be a cross-border estate planning, cross-border succession, or a cross-border commercial transaction, two business partners entering into some kind of business deal. It can be an international trust that's being set up. It can be an international judicial proceeding. You sue someone abroad, or you want to present a foreign judgment in the US and have it executed. All these things are private international law. And what we do as the organization is try and harmonize the rules that apply in this context. The way we do this is by developing international treaties, and we call them conventions. And one of the many conventions that we have developed here at the HCCH is, of course, the convention that's very much at the heart of today's discussion, the 1961 HCCH Apostille Convention. So keep in mind that the conference refers to the organization and the convention refers to the treaty or the instrument that we are talking about. Now, the Apostille Convention is very much private national law treaty when you think of any situation where a person needs to use a public document, and that is a birth certificate, a marriage certificate, a death certificate, a notarial act, a diploma, an extract from a register, anything that has been, say, produced in one of the states of the United States of America that needs to be produced, say, here in the States. Well, for that document to be produced, you have to go through what is called an authentication process to authenticate the origin of the document, to make sure that the recipient of that document knows that this document really comes from where it says it's coming from. And in the past, this was a very cumbersome, difficult, long, inefficient process where you had to go through a chain of legalization. The Apostille Convention does away with all of that and replaces it with a single formality, which is the issuance of an apostille, which is basically a certificate of origin authenticating the origin of the public document at stake. And in the US, as you well know, one of the competent authority, or one set of the competent authorities that issues these apostilles are, of course, the offices of the Secretaries of State. It's a very successful convention, the Apostille Convention. As we speak, we have 118 contracting parties. The five most recent contracting parties, or think of them as states to keep things simple. The five most recent ones were Tunisia, Bolivia, Guyana, the Philippines, and Palau. This little dot there on the southeast coast of the Philippines. Not only is the Apostille Convention the most widely ratified and acceded to convention, it's also by far the most widely used. As a matter of fact, according to the statistical information that we have, we do believe that there is one apostille issued in approximately every 2.5 seconds, which means that since I started talking around, say, 5 minutes ago, probably more than 150 apostilles have already been issued somewhere around the world. And all of this to say that the apostille, therefore, is an extremely practical instrument, extremely relevant from a practical point of view, because it really makes people's life easier. People are very happy when they get their apostille. People can be very unhappy if, for whatever reason, they don't get their apostille. And please do keep this in mind when people have, say, an electronic notarial act or any other electronic public document that they need to produce abroad, and they can't get an electronic apostille because the relevant competent authority is not in a position to issue such electronic apostilles. Terribly frustrating, and easily leading to a situation where the competent authority might be criticized for not having implemented the system of the electronic apostille. But before turning to the EAPP, let me also look ahead a little bit, and we know that the Apostille Convention continues to attract global interest. You see there on the slide on the top part those states that we know of that are actively pursuing the implementation of the Apostille Convention, joining this convention, hopefully in not too distant future. And I take it that from your perspective, seeing Canada join or seeing China join will be particularly important, but of course also Vietnam and Malaysia and all the others that are listed there. Who will be the next one? I don't know, Brody. I personally would probably put my money on Indonesia at this stage, but one never knows. So stay tuned, because there is certainly more to come. But as we have seen, the Apostille Convention is an old convention. It dates from 1961. It was developed at a time when the internet did not exist, when people did not talk about PDF and electronic documents being used at a very wide range. And that's why in 2006, we already, with the active support for which we have been extremely grateful of the NNA, the National Notary Association in the USA, we started to develop the electronic apostille program. Now, it is important to know that the EAPP has two components. One is the issuance of electronic apostilles, and the other component is the operation of electronic registers of apostilles. The electronic register is basically an invitation to all competent authorities to operate an electronic register that can be accessed online by any recipient of an apostille, to just, go online, key in the number of the apostille, possibly another code, and verify the origin of the apostille, and making sure that the apostille has been issued by the competent authority in the state of origin of the document. We are not so much going to talk about e-registers today. I really want to put the emphasis on the electronic apostille component. And since 2006, you will see that we have attracted quite a number now of implementing contracting parties. There are currently 41 contracting parties or states around the world that are operating electronic register, one or more electronic register, and there are 18 jurisdictional states, I should say, that have started to issue electronic apostilles. So that means that approximately a third of the total contracting parties have implemented one or both components of the EAPP, and this is continuing to grow quite rapidly. It's fair to say that the e-register component has traditionally been the easier component to implement, and this is evident from the numbers, but the issuance of electronic apostilles is hot on its heels, if I may say so. Of particular note is the increase in interest in the e-apostille component in the last 3 to 5 years in particular. You see that the lower graph is increasing in particular since 2016 and 18. Interestingly, for each of these graphs, we have used the year in which the first e-apostille was issued or an e-register was implemented, respectively. So these graphs do not take into account recent instances where authorities have significantly upgraded their system, because that's also being done already, or indeed where additional authorities within the same contracting party have implemented one of these components. So in other words, if in the US you have a new state that operates an electronic register, it's not going to have an impact on the number of 41 contracting parties, because the US is already listed as a contracting party where e-registers are in operation, and we are coming to this in a moment. Most relevantly, since the outbreak of the pandemic, we have seen new or upgraded e-apostille implementations in many different states. I mention here in particular Bulgaria, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Brazil most recently, which is starting to issue e-apostilles at the very high scale and number. But we have also been contacted by other countries such as France, Israel, Luxembourg, Uzbekistan, Japan, Armenia, and Korea, where authorities are developing and putting in place specific efforts towards the implementation of the EAPP, and in most of these instances, both the e-apostille component and the e-register component. And there is, of course, the most recent development in the state of Montana, but more on that in just a moment. But this brings me to the situation in the US in general. And here is a map showing the status of the implementation of the EAPP in the US. And we can start in the heart, the center of the map, with Kansas as one of the states identified as issuing e-apostilles. Kansas was, as a matter of fact, the first state in the US to issue an electronic apostille, and that goes back as early as 2007. Now, in all transparency, and to be totally honest, I think there was a little bit of, we want to be the first, and they were the first, but in all honesty, there hasn't been much of e-apostille activity in Kansas since then. I will be more than happy to be corrected if we have colleagues from Kansas on the call. But my understanding is that after a few e-apostilles that have been issued in 2007, the interest for e-apostilles has decreased in Kansas. What we have witnessed, however, is that a number of states have started to operate e-registers. Rhode Island, Texas, California, North Carolina, Washington, state of Washington, Colorado, and West Virginia all have e-registers in operation. Montana, however, is now the only U.S. state with both the e-register and e-apostille components in place. And we want to extend our heartfelt congratulations to all the authorities involved, in particular to Laurie Ham, for making this possible. And I will ask actually Laurie in a few minutes to talk about their experience with the implementation of the EAPP in Montana, before asking another dear friend who has been following these developments since the very beginning, Tim Reiniger, who I think is also on the call to speak about other developments, current ongoing developments in various states of the US in terms of implementing the EAPP. Because we know that currently there are discussions in Delaware, in Florida, in Kansas, in Nevada, in Texas, and in Virginia, all geared towards the implementation of the EAPP. And this is probably my core message again for today. And I say this with the greatest possible respect, but implementing the EAPP is not about resources. Implementing the EAPP can be done fairly easily with off-the-shelf technology, just using straightforward PDF software. You get an electronic certificate for the issuance of a digital signature, and you are basically able to start issuing electronic apostilles. For e-registers, what we have seen is that the competent authorities would either run the e-register on a separate server or have a specifically dedicated space on an existing server for just the operation of the e-register, and basically that's it. But it's not about money, it's not about resources, it's simply a question of priorities. Do you want to be able to offer this service to people who come with an electronic notarial act, an electronic public document of any sort to your office as the competent authority, asking for an electronic apostille because the document needs to be produced abroad? With the really impressive developments that we have seen last week during the presentation on these developments of electronic notarization or remote online notarization in the US, it's really just a question of, well, days and weeks, I would have thought, before you reach a significant volume of documents for which there would be ultimately the need for an electronic apostille. This is coming, and I really urge you to do whatever is necessary to be ready to face that new reality and to be able to continue to ensure that your customers are happy customers because they do get the apostille, the electronic apostille that they are looking forward to receive. Now, I know that I am speaking here in very abstract, theoretical terms. We have designed the EAPP to encourage states to implementing it, and you have seen that it's getting more and more traction, and we are very happy with that. But at this stage, I may invite Laurie Ham from Montana to maybe share with us the experience they had in implementing the EAPP. And Laurie, I would be particularly interested in knowing whether it was difficult, to implement, in particular, the apostille component, whether it took an awful lot of resources, both financially or human, or if you have the feeling that this was a pretty straightforward, decent effort that was, didn't have anything to do with rocket science. And of course, I would be interested to know also if you are happy today that you have done it. So, Rachel, if I may just give the floor to Laurie at this stage.
Certainly, Laurie, I have unmuted your mic. You are free to speak.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Berdisconi. This has been a really exciting kind of opportunity, and many thanks to Tim Reiniger for asking us to participate. I think this is something that we've all talked about for years, but never really had our heads around what technically and physically it meant. And really, when we got into it and worked with the support staff there, Brody, and it was really easy. Basically what we've done is opened an account with DocuSign, and that's the vehicle that we're using to create the electronic signature and seal that we affix to the apostille and securitize it with the underlying document. So. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
I don't know if my mic is still open. Yes. No, thank you, Laurie. Is there anything else you want to share in terms of the practical experience or the number of e-apostilles, or how you see this developing in future, or any other kind of takeaway that you might be able to share with your colleagues, things to do or not to do?
Well, I think it's still a learning process, and of course, the thing so far is that there's still a lack of universal acceptance, on the other end. As I understand it, the 2 countries that we've sent the e-apps to already are kind of saying, yeah, we're taking that, but we sent backup hard copies, and I think they're still kind of clinging to the paper. So it's, everybody's still using floaties. We've got to learn to dive into the water and accept it. I think it's the human factor. It's not the technical factor that I'm seeing from my end, anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. No, that is a very, very important practical comment to keep in mind, of course. And I should have mentioned as part of my introduction to the APP that there is now a series of recommendations and statements that have been adopted by the relevant bodies here within the HCCH that have confirmed again and again and again that an electronic apostille validly issued in one state must be recognized in the receiving state. There is no reason, no ground on which the receiving state can refuse the acceptance of the electronic apostille. So please do share these experiences and continue to share these experiences with us so that we can, if possible, intervene with the receiving authorities and bring to their attention these various statements that confirm the validity and acceptability of electronic apostilles. What we do realize, however, is that sometimes it's not the electronic apostille that's being refused. It's the underlying public document in electronic form that's being refused. So that the receiving state says, while I'm happy to give full effect to the e-apostille, my court system or whatever authority is not in a position to accept the electronic version of the birth certificate. We need to have that in paper form. That still exists. Although there, again, the mentality is shifting and there is more and more move, of course, to a non-line only or electronic only type of environment. But again, it is important to stress that an e-apostille must be recognized abroad. At this stage, may I also ask Tim Reiniger maybe, and I don't think he needs to be introduced. He is well known to all of us as one of the first supporters of these developments, including also of e-notarization and online remote notarization. And I know that Tim is actively involved in these further discussions in various other US states that take an active interest now in the EAPP. Tim, over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bernasconi. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
It is a pleasure for me to be here today. As you noted, most folks on the call probably know me, but many don't. Just quickly, I want to say that I have had the extreme professional privilege of working with the notary professionals in your group, Bill Anderson, Kathleen Butler, and Mark Aronson, who are all true professionals. It's been a great privilege to know them all. But I've also had a great privilege in working with NAS over the years and the NPAs. Your ranks, of course, change with every election, every cycle, but a great group of professionals. It's been a privilege working with you all. And of course, Dr. Bernasconi and The Hague. When I was in law school, in our law schools, we have courses on conflicts of law, choice of law, which typically are the most difficult courses. And so The Hague always represented kind of a difficult subject of conundrums with the conflicts of law courses. So I never dreamt that I would be sitting here having had professional connections with Dr. Bernasconi and The Hague. It's been a great privilege for me as a lawyer. But having said all of that, for the NPA audience today, I am here really, in effect, representing, as an American lawyer, 4 different entities that desperately need electronic apostilles. And many of you may recall last year that the American Academy of Adoption Attorneys, combined with the American Public Human Services Association, sent a joint letter to NAS requesting that you all move forward with integration. And now they have been joined this year by the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel and the National Association of Estate Planners and Counsels, 2 highly esteemed American organizations in the whole area of probate law. And they have been sending individual letters to your secretaries. Many of you may have seen those letters or heard of them. And what's, for me, in all those cases, I've had relationships for various reasons, and it's been unbelievable to me that they would all ask about apostilles, electronic apostilles. So I've been happy to be in that place to work with them, to promote this. A big point I want to make here is I have, as a result of this, working with these groups, come to see the apostille, electronic apostilles, notarial acts, as fundamentally aspects of human rights. I wouldn't have said that back in 2003 when this started, 2010, working on the online notary laws in Virginia. But I do see this as a fundamental aspect of human rights. And by that, I mean simply that for each individual, if we can't have our legal signature on a document recognized anywhere, recognized in another country or by another state, that human right is dramatically diminished. And that's a right that goes to performing all transactions, to be able to perform many aspects of life. So I know it sounds grandiose to say, but I'm now convinced that this all ultimately falls under the category of human rights. It's not a tech issue per se, and Laurie Ham just pointed out, this is about humans, not tech per se. And if you view it that way, I think that would help to move this up as a more urgent priority within your offices, combined with hearing from Dr. Bernasconi and Laurie that this is actually relatively simple to perform, inexpensive. I just want to make one last note. Dr. Bernasconi mentioned the 6 other states. So these are states that are being looked to, hopefully, as the next group of adoptees, states adopting, integrating electronic apostille capabilities. These aren't picked necessarily as a bunch of favorites by somebody or all that, but because of where they have stood in the embracing electronic notarization in general, but states also that have huge importance, particular importance, to the groups I've mentioned. Nevada has huge demands for certified records of marriages, divorces, certain types of vital records. Certainly Delaware as, in effect, a capital of corporate records for this country. Florida and Texas, the reasons they're obvious for their pivotal roles with our relations with South Central America and those populations. In Virginia, the first state with the online notary law, hopefully will and needs to get into this act because of the volumes of online notarial acts that have been performed under those laws. And then Kansas, as has been noted, hopefully it'll be able to easily embrace reinvigorating its program. So those are the points that I really, we could spend a lot of time talking about the human rights aspects of this, but I am very proud to be involved now, knowing you all and being on the side of really aggressively lending my support to pushing adoption, integration of electronic apostilles capabilities to help solving problems for humans all over the globe. So thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts and your involvement in these ongoing developments. I always prefer to have people from the relevant state talking to an audience from the relevant state and hear about these first-hand experiences and encouragements from the relevant authorities and experts in that state, as opposed to, hear it from the guys from The Hague, if I may say so. We don't have a personal interest in seeing the APP implemented, but like Tim and Laurie said so effectively, for us, our mission is to ensure that the practicability of the apostille is maintained and that the effective service that it provides is being brought into, the modern times, if I may say so. And while I do understand that at the beginning, many years ago, this might have been a bit of a daunting task, maybe, to look at the implementation of the APP because the demand was maybe not as high. I think, if anything, the current pandemic has shown how important it is for an effective competent authority to be able to offer an online service so that the relevant documents still can be sent out of the USA to relevant receiving states. And I don't think it's an acceptable excuse anymore in this day and age to say, sorry, we don't operate online. You have to come back in 6 months when the pandemic will hopefully be over. And the beauty is that the system and the technology exists, and that many thousands of these e-apostilles are currently being issued on a daily basis. There are jurisdictions that only issue e-apostilles, no paper apostille at all anymore. There are other jurisdictions that offer both services in parallel, and the customer can choose between a paper apostille or an electronic apostille. But it's really just a question of time before the volume of e-apostilles will be much more significant than paper apostilles. I'm personally absolutely convinced of that. So the story basically is that all these, again, very important developments in terms of e-notarization or remote online notarization, well, the process does not stop there. The e-apostille is the natural extension of this process, because these documents, some of them or a good chunk of them, need to be produced abroad. And for that to happen, you must have the e-apostille component in place. So just to wrap up, basically, I think looking beyond COVID-19, when we hopefully get out of this rather dramatic period, I think there is a growing need and demand for the EAPP in general, but in particular the electronic apostille. It really benefits constituents and a whole series of different industry providers. We have also been approached here in The Hague by estate planners for whom it is essential, including US-based national estate planners, for whom it is essential to have access to electronic apostilles, but it's true for civil status documents as well as for diplomas. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had a full discussion with a worldwide operating body that wants to facilitate the use of electronic apostilles in relation to diplomas as well. I think the beauty of the EAPP, furthermore, is that it's very adaptable and customizable. In other words, every office, Secretary of State office, can really, implement the model that suits its reality and needs best. And again, it's really not costly, and it's not resource intense, because you can use off-the-shelf technology or go full-fledged and implement blockchain-based EAPP if you want. That's currently being explored very actively in Korea, for example. And last but not least, I do want to stress also the environmental impact of all of that. So less paper circulates, the better it is in terms of carbon footprint of each apostilles. That's basically what we here from The Hague wanted to share with you in terms of the need and the advantages of the EAPP and the apostille component in particular. Again, our comments were high level in nature, but Brody, tomorrow, same time, same place, will give you much more details about the actual implementation of these components, things to do and not to do, or what to think about, and what experiences we can draw from other jurisdictions. But at this stage, I want to hand back to Rachel and see if there are any questions that have been put through the chat function. Back to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So there was a comment that if assistance was needed, or if there are issues with acceptance of apostilles, there was a volunteer to engage diplomatically to assist with that. So if they're running into issues of acceptance of apostilles, e-apostilles overseas, you have a volunteer who is more than willing to engage diplomatically. Another comment is that Nevada has had an e-register for a year now. So there's looks like room for an update. And those have been the only comments so far. As we go through this, if you guys have more questions, please feel free to post them. We will be, we're looking into being able to publish the actual webinar itself. I know Mike, with the previous presentation, they published the slides on NPA's website. So I would assume something similar will occur for this. And I do want to thank you all for attending today. It was a very fascinating, to me, I found the topic fascinating, really interesting, and I couldn't agree more that particularly in this day and age, with so much in this global pandemic, I know I personally work with a lot of e-filing projects with our organization, and they've just exploded. And I think that this is just another indication that in this day and age, we're just having to move to an electronic and an online format. So very timely and very appropriate. But we hope you guys can join us tomorrow. As Dr. Bernasconi said, same time, same place. You should have the information on file, and we look forward to seeing you all then. And in the meantime, everybody have a great day.
Thank you very much, and thank you all from our side again for your interest and participation. Let me simply say that Brody and I will remain at your full disposal for any further assistance or information you may require. If you want to embark on this exciting road of implementing the EAPP, there is more information to come tomorrow also in terms of information that is available on our website. Brody will share that information with you. In the meantime, you have my email address. You can always reach us directly through this email as well. And I have the suspicion that the very kind diplomatic offer that was made comes from our dear friend Bill Fritzlin in the Department of State in Washington. Bill, thank you very much indeed also for joining and for again lending your support to this development. I know it's the responsibility of the states to implement it at state level, but your support in particular also in terms of the acceptance of these EAPs abroad is always much appreciated. A big thank you to you as well. And on that happy note, we say goodbye and good night from The Hague.